excited for this conversation today with Tom Conlon. Tom is runs a marketing agency called North Street. They have some offices in kind of Providence, Rhode Island, as well as New York City. And he's been a business owner for 14 years. And he's got about 12 employees, and he's continued to grow. He talks a lot about just his path in that entrepreneurial journey. Talks about segmentation and really finding a beachhead, a customer that you really can build your business around. He talks about the role of mentors and talks a lot about like how you have to be more well-rounded as a entrepreneur than just the skills that you come into it. He's a member and a mentor in an organization called Entrepreneurial Organization. These are national chapters all around the United States, and he really feels passionately about this as part of his ability to succeed is learning from others. And so this is a great conversation. There's a lot of valuable insight. There's a lot of humility from Tom, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. All right, well, welcome to Startup Stories from the Treehouse. And today is the first episode I've ever done that is not in the Treehouse. I'm actually in my parents' house helping them move. And Tom, I want to welcome you to the podcast. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about maybe your origin story, right? So you and I have had a couple of conversations offline. I think it's pretty interesting. I'm pretty excited about this conversation. But maybe just talk to me a little bit about your kind of entrepreneurial journey and kind of what you're doing today.
Yeah, sure. So I run a company called North Street. We're a branding and creative agency. I started 14 years ago. Today, what we are is we're 12 people. We used to be New York City based. We're now based all over the country, and all over the world. I'm sure we can get into that later. But ultimately, North Street's a branding and creative agency. We specialize in financial services, healthcare, nonprofit, and professional services. So we're very like B2B focused.
Okay.
I started the company 14 years ago with a partner, actually. I did more digital. She did more sort of print and branding. And so we made a really good, our skills were very complementary, and we worked together really well for about 3 years. And then that exploded and the company became mine after that. Yep. I had no idea what to do. I'm sure we can cover that later too. But in the last, say, 9 years, or actually it's been more than that, 11 years since she split, I've developed the company into, like I said, it's a 12-person agency. We are servicing, I'd say, we're mid-market in terms of the types of clients that we service. But I think we've done a really good job at identifying what we're good at, who we're really good at working with, getting that message out there. And hopefully just kind of always improving on what we do and how we do it.
Well, that's pretty cool. Maybe talk to me a little bit about kind of that beachhead strategy, right? You've picked a couple of kind of B2B verticals to go after. And it probably didn't start with all of those to start with. You probably basically maybe shotgunned a little bit and then got a little more specific. But maybe you just talk about that whole idea of like defining who you are and then where you think you have some strengths.
Yeah. So, starting out, and I say this jokingly, but I'm actually kind of serious, is that like when we started out, we would take money for anything, and we would take money from anybody. Yeah. We would do anything for anybody as long as they were paying us, right? Because it's like, you don't really know any better. And, I started my business as a designer, and I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to just design stuff. That works for a little bit while you're getting yourself up and running, especially if it's just you. But ultimately, like once you realize that you need to get new business, and that in order to get new business, you have to market effectively. And in order to market yourself effectively, you really have to be able to like talk to specific audiences. You start to sort of realize that you can't be all things to all people, right? And if you're like me, you probably listen to a lot of business podcasts, read a lot of business books, and at least in the creative services industry, there is, riches are in the niches, right? It's like that like the more you focus, the more successful you're going to be. And why is that? It's what I just said, which is that like there's no way you can market to the yellow pages, right? Because like, how could you possibly come up with a compelling message that speaks to every single person on earth? You can't. And so you start to realize that like, oh, if I want to get more financial services clients, then I really need to let me just say, if I want to get more clients, I'm really good at doing financial services stuff. I have a pretty good portfolio of it, and I know what their problems are that need to be solved. And so, if I'm going to create a marketing strategy or marketing messaging, now I have a target client, and I have the ability to create targeted messaging. In the absence of that, like I said, you're just think about going into a room, think about going into a bar or like a cookout, and someone's like, "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, we're a design agency." "Oh, really? Like, maybe I can introduce you to somebody. Who should I introduce you to?" And if my answer is like, "Well, we'll literally do
Anybody.
anything for anybody," then like, who's this person sitting there like, "Oh, okay." Uh, but if you say, listen, my agency does branding and website design and development for financial services clients, and we work really well with either marketing people inside of those financial services organizations or principals. That person's either going to have someone they can introduce you to, or they're not. And like, if they're not, great, move on. If they do, excellent. And that's just like one very, very, that sort of cocktail party cookout example is a very, very small sort of example of why it is beneficial to really focus on, on who you work with. And the reason and how we got there was just, I've been in business for 14 years. At the beginning, you start to do work for people, then you do a good job for somebody. They start sending you more work. They make introductions to other people in your network. And all of a sudden, one client that's in financial services is suddenly 10 clients in financial services. And so that's how that happened. And similar thing kind of happened with just professional services. And then I'd say later on, at a couple of years, probably like 10 years in, is when we really started to like have enough work in the healthcare and nonprofit sectors that we felt good about saying, okay, this is a specialty, and now we can go out and get new work based on the merits of the stuff that we've done.
Okay, well, maybe dig in a little bit more. So what I kind of hear you is saying, like, you're creating this beachhead, and a lot of this is customer discovery, right? You need to understand your financial services problems, your personas, the challenges that they have. You got to be able to speak their language. Do you feel like all of those things help you sharpen kind of your pitch and help it from a competitive standpoint on top of it, right? Like, it's not only you can give good service to that client because you know their business well, but I think from a competitive standpoint, when they're looking at a bunch of proposals, yours kind of starts to stand out as something that really resonates with them. And it feels like you understand their business problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, someone said this to me a long time ago, and it has stuck with me. And it was actually we lost a bid on a proposal to work with a hotel company, right? And this is like a long time ago when we were working with hotel companies.
Anybody?
Yeah. And ultimately, they chose to go with this other company that specializes in websites for like hotels, right? Like, so think about all the things that need to be built into a hotel website, and like, let's just take a small thing like a booking widget, right? My team had never built a booking widget. We didn't do hotel websites regularly. This other company already had that tool in their toolbox. And what my client or the prospective client ultimately said to me was, they have run into all of the problems that someone is going to run into 100 times already. And so like things that are going to like stop you guys dead in your tracks or be a very big problem for you, like this other company has already figured out. And so that's the power of like specialization right there,
Yep.
right? And that's the beachhead that you're kind of talking about, which is that like, look, when it comes to financial services, like, man, there's knowing like what the clients are like. Sometimes it's like there's a committee, but then there's the sort of like CEO, and a lot of the times the CEO can't be involved in the project until the very end, and then comes in with big ideas at the very end. It's like we've already we've dealt with that 100 times. Okay, compliance, that's a big thing with
Yeah.
law firms and financial services firms. It's like every word that goes on the website, okay, it has to go to legal compliance, and legal compliance comes back with like their red marker, and they don't get involved until the very end either. And so like we've dealt with those things 100 times. We know what it's like to work with a financial services firm. So that absolutely differentiates us in our proposals, not only because we're showing work in the financial services firm saying like, hey, look at our portfolio. We've done websites or branding for companies like yours 100 times, but also we've run all the traps before, right?
Right.
Like we know the problems that are gonna that one could potentially encounter versus a general interest firm that also does restaurant websites and also does sneaker e-commerce websites. Like they're gonna the first time like they get an email from compliance saying like, hey, we need to redo XYZ, like that's gonna be new to them.
What? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, good. Well, maybe pivoting a little bit, you talked about in your intro a little bit of going from kind of being a centralized organization in New York City to being a decentralized organization. In some of our other conversations, you talked about this really kind of happened during the COVID period of time.
Yeah.
So maybe you just talk about the dynamics and kind of the culture of your company and that transition, because, I think a lot of startups are looking at saying, I can get talent anywhere. That's great. From a remote standpoint, but it's not always easy to coordinate and really feel that kind of energy that like a startup would have. And so I'm kind of curious. I mean, you basically had an organization that was effective and working, and then basically you had to break it up during that time, and now you have kind of two offices and a bunch of people disparate. So maybe just talk a little bit about that process and kind of what it made. Was there some growing up that it made you do? Was there more process oriented? What were some of the ramifications of those changes?
Yeah, sure. So the switch to remote or distributed was has been really, really positive for us. And it's funny because it's something I resisted for a long time. And, so up until 2020, we had an office in New York City in the South Street Seaport District. All of us, every single person who worked for the company, which I think was like 8 at the time, everyone worked 10 to 6 in the New York City office. We were all in person. That's just how the company ran. We would honestly, most pitches and like client meetings were also done in person. We would, and if they weren't done in person, it's funny. It wasn't even done over Zoom. It was done over a conference call, which was horrible. And I hope to never have to return to those.
Have to do that again. Yeah.
Oh my God. So what was funny, Todd, was like, I had this one developer this is right before the COVID. He was a really great employee. And he would ask me over and over again. He's like, can we have like flexible work from home policy? Can I have like work from home Fridays? And I was like, Dave, listen, I 100% trust you. And I trust that you would be completely diligent and responsible with your working from home, privileges. But if I give you something, I need to give it to the entire company. If I give something to the entire company, it's impossible to take something back, right? So I just have to think about it. I just need time to think about how we would roll this out, like how it would apply to all employees. Would we have some days where some people are in the office and others aren't? Well, March 13th, 2020, the Band-Aid gets ripped off, right? And like, we're in New York City. Yeah, exactly. My team literally, like the night before, my team's like, they're talking about closing the bridges and tunnels. Like, I don't think we should go into the office tomorrow. And I'm like, I think you're right. So like the Friday the 13th was our first day remote. And it was like, whoa, okay, this is us now, right? And it took a little, figuring out. But for the most part, it was sort of like, let's just try something and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else. But ultimately, where we've settled now, X number of years later, we're now a team of 12. We're probably going to be 14 in the next couple weeks. We do have an office in Providence because that's where I'm located, and I have an assistant here. We have a New York City office, but no one's actually in there. We just happen to have a lease that I re-signed at the beginning of 2020. But what has happened is almost immediately after like a few months into COVID, we were like, well, no one knows how long this is going to last, right? And like we need to like get through this crazy time. So we hired a designer that we had worked with forever. She had worked with us back in like the early days. She was living in California at the time, which was just like a non-starter when we were all in person. But suddenly it's like, whoa, anything's possible, right?
Right.
So she was really like the first domino. We hired this designer we'd worked with. She was in LA. We started working with her. It worked perfectly. And like right after that, we were like, okay, like now when, again, not knowing how long this is going to last and still thinking somewhere that like, oh, well, I'll just like return to office at some point. We just started hiring people. And what that allowed us to do was a couple things. Yes, we can find talent anywhere. So for me, hiring like really senior creatives and engineers on the development side is really hard to do in New York City. I mean,
Yep.
you've just got it's the most expensive place in the country to live, and those are the most expensive people to hire. So immediately, like the options for us in terms of talent it exploded exponentially, which was really exciting. And then what also happened was we rebuilt our dev team almost completely with offshore talent.
Oh,
So
okay.
we've got a
Yep.
dev team that is mostly in Latin America. We've got one person who's actually in Madagascar, in Africa, but otherwise, like the whole dev team is now offshore. They are fully integrated into North Street. They're our employees, and they're full time and everything. But that's been really interesting and exciting, and has allowed us because of the I guess the currency arbitrage, we can call it.
Hmm.
I'm able to actually get more senior people and more of them in my dev
Yep.
team, which just wasn't a possibility for us before. Um, so it's been extremely advantageous. We do a lot of stuff, like we do morning check-ins, morning checkouts. We try to do a lot of culture stuff, and I'd say that culture piece is the biggest kind of like the biggest change, or the biggest thing that I think I need to monitor, and I think all business owners the startups that are listening to this, like you have to be extremely intentional about culture when you are remote, because when you're in person it's just easy. It's like, oh yeah, they call it water cooler talk because you're literally like standing next to a water
Sure.
cooler talking. Like it's very unstructured, right? It's like, hey, what are you doing? Or like, hey, I can look over your shoulder and see what you're working on and ask you a question about it, etc. All of that stuff that just comes so naturally and so easily in person, while it might seem like that's nice to have, actually that stuff is critical and crucial to like team culture, but also like the development of like employees, like the especially younger ones. So I'll just say that like we are very intentional about culture, and it's a constant work in progress, like just making sure that we're all seeing each other's faces at least once a day, hopefully twice, and then getting together once, maybe every week, or maybe once every other week, just for like a purely social thing. And it's just to like, it's usually on a Friday, and it's just one of those, hey, let's go around the room, tell me something interesting you worked on this week and something interesting you're going to work on this weekend. And something just as simple as that, when you're going around the room, the virtual room at the end of the week, and people are talking and smiling, it's like, oh, right. Like
We're getting
this
it.
is the stuff, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this is the
Yep.
stuff.
Yep.
We're doing it. And so, um, all in all, the change to remote or virtual was hugely advantageous. And again, just the culture piece is what you have to really be intentional and careful about, is my advice.
Yeah, before we were talking a little bit about, I have a daughter who's just about ready to graduate from college, and she's really kind of excited about doing a remote job. And we were having this conversation
Mm.
about just maybe the dangers of people that are early in their career taking remote jobs and just not having, like, basically that whole business culture of how do I model, how do I be successful in this environment, what do I need to learn, what's valued. If you don't have any of that baseline to start with, it is super hard, I think, through Zoom and even some of the cultural things
Mm.
you're talking about, even a couple of touch points a week to maybe build that. And maybe what I've been kind of maybe articulating is the career path going to be as steep for people that are super excited about, and aggressive about their career versus I've got a job, right? If I want a job, maybe this is totally fine. But if you want to progress through an organization, if you want to rise in the ranks, if you want more responsibility, does maybe taking a remote job early in your career become a limiting factor in that? And so I'm curious of what you think on that, and if you have any strong opinions. It sounds like you're hiring more senior people, but I wonder if it's partly because of that factoring as well.
Yeah, I so there's a lot there in that question. So I'll answer it piece by piece. I think you know if you're just taking a job for a job, then fine. Remote
Yeah,
remote is totally fine. It's in fact it's
it's
amazing,
awesome.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's totally amazing. If you're genuinely like, if you're like, this is my career, and like I love this company or type of company, and like this is what I want to do, and I want to like really do my best here, and then like leverage that, maybe get a promotion or two here, and then move on to the next company or the next thing. Remote is difficult because it really just takes, honestly, it takes an investment from you and your manager to just realize that like all of that stuff I was talking about before, the stuff that kind of just happens in the moment, yeah, it's important for culture, but it's also important for career development. I mean, I think about my first job out of college. I shared a cubicle essentially with my manager, right?
Yeah.
She was like right next to me. And so even though like I was pulled into every meeting, sometimes just for observation. I mean, I observed the way she dressed. I observed the way she talked to other people. I observed the way she talked to people that reported to her versus the people she reported to. Uh, I observed what it was like to take a lunch break, right? And
Yeah.
like during the week, or run personal errands during the week, right? I learned what like a professional, I don't know, like what a review was, and like what that meant. And um, there's just so much that happens in just that everyday kind of, again, through osmosis piece that is lost during remote. And so it's not lost like it's dead. It's just that it's since it's not there, you have to come up with other ways to do that. And so I just think making sure that, as a young person, it's like, hey, it's just getting FaceTime with your manager on a regular basis, just to make sure that like you have you have your marching orders, you have your KPIs. Like, what are you being measured against? Like,
Right. Yeah.
what's a measure of success for this role? Making sure you understand that. Making sure that there's like I think the thing with remote is that you can't just tap somebody on the shoulder and say like, "Hey, I have a question," right? And so it's like knowing when to ask questions, when to Google something, but also when not to spend 2 hours Googling something when you could have just asked somebody a
That's the
quick
question.
question. So like, it just takes a lot of work. Now, I will say that I see tremendous value in hiring young people who, first of all, younger people who want a remote job and they just want a job. I have no problem. I have no problem with that type of person. There is a place for all types of people in all organizations, and sometimes you just need someone who's extremely productive in the hours that you have for them, and they're very good at like sitting down at a task and doing it. And you don't need them, and they don't need you to be part of some big fabric of culture and everything else. Um, but we do like to hire younger people at North Street, and we're figuring that out like everybody else. We've identified that like you can't just, yes, you can hire an older person, a more experienced person, basically older. You can bring in a more experienced person. Like, the advantage is you can basically wind them up and set them off in a direction, and like they're going to do
Sure.
what they've
What you
been
asked them to
trained
do.
to do there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they're expensive, and also like they might also I find that people who are more senior are also very used to having other people do things for them, and that's not a
Yeah.
bad thing, right? Like if you're more senior, you might have been more of a manager, so you're very good at like understanding like what you're really good at and where your focus should be, and like when you should like bring in other people. Well, you know, unfortunately, we can't always bring in other people for things, and so for younger people, we are like North Street is very conscious about making sure that there is a place for us to hire younger people at the very beginning of their career. We sort of create for each role, we create kind of like levels, like
Mm-hmm.
level one, level two, level three, and each level has a commensurate amount, level of responsibilities and also salary, right? And so it's very clear, like, okay, in order to get to this next phase of my career, at North Street at least, I need to demonstrate that I can do these things. And if I do, then I'm going to be making this amount of money. Um, it's honestly, Todd, it's a work in progress. I mean, it's working for us so far, but we're hiring we're hiring a lot of people sometimes, and like within 3 months, we're like, hey, look, this is an
Just didn't
experiment
work out.
that just
Yeah.
didn't work for us, and But other times, you find like this diamond in the rough, right? This
Yeah.
kid who's just looking for like their shot, right? And it's like you get them in at the very beginning of their career. You can mold them in terms of like processes and like expectations and everything. And the hope for us is they stay at North Street as long as it's mutually beneficial for both of us. And at some point, they're going to hit a ceiling,
Yep.
right? And hopefully, they leave better than when they arrived. You know, more prepared for the career road that's ahead of them. And we also benefited from them being at our company, right? They did really great work for what we paid them for the time that they were here, and they advanced us in whatever whatever field they were working in, and then they've given us information about the next time we hire for that role that they were in. Okay, well now we know like what to look for, what
What
to
to look for.
avoid, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe one last question on this topic. I think it's been interesting to look at young. We work with a lot of founders that are generally younger. Conflict is always one that's kind of interesting. I'm kind of curious if just like how to deal with conflict. And I think there's a difference between remote and doing it in person. And so again, go back to your cubicle where you sit with your manager. You see how hard conversations are actually worked through, right, in a constructive way where you're not just beating on the person and feeling frustrated or feeling belittled. There's a constructive criticism to it. I'm curious. I just look at my own kids and stuff, and I think about they're kind of mobile first. They really get kind of concerned when they have to write something formal, even in Slack or email. They're much easier to write something in text. And then I think there's a lot of conflict avoidance sometimes if they can avoid it. And I think in business, especially in remote, that can be definitely an issue because they get frustrated, they don't articulate it well. And I think as managers or as people that are working in those environments, you almost have to dig into that and constantly assume that there could be some problems and how to create safe spaces to have that when maybe they don't have all the skills, at least early on in their career, to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a young person who just started this week. He's in his 20s, and he's working here with me actually in person, which is helpful. But I think that this goes for remote too. I think one thing, as the manager or the boss or the person who hired this person, I think it's unfair to assume that this person, like right out of school, like young entry level, maybe they have one job under their belt. It's unfair to assume that they know anything, right?
Yeah,
Like they
yeah,
don't
that's true.
they don't they don't they don't know just the sort of things. I've been in the workforce for 20 something years now. There are just things that I take for granted or things that I
Yeah,
have known for 2 decades that I don't even think about. I don't even know I know them because I know them so well, right?
yeah,
But you can't assume someone who's 20 something who's just joined the workforce knows anything, right? And so I think as the manager, it's your response. At least the way I'm handling it is, I'm like, look, there are no dumb questions, right?
yep,
I don't
yep.
pretend to assume that you know how anything works. Um, I mean, of course, for whatever I hired you for, you should be able to be like good
Competent.
at
Yep.
producing something that approximates the thing that you're hired to do. But other than that, like, I mean, it's just like ordering. Yeah, it's just little things like, he was asking me the other day about like ordering supplies, and I'm like, oh, you don't need like, there's no like formal process for
Is
that.
here.
Like
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
don't but another company, yeah, there is going to be, there's going to
It's
be
good that
a
he asked.
requisition form, of course,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so, um, and so when I think that's the first piece. Like as the manager, it's just like, look, you got to just assume that this person, like they don't make assumptions that they are that more experienced person that you can wind up and just send
Just
off
let him
because they're
go.
the opposite of that. They're the opposite of that, right? I think the second thing, again, as I like to say this, is like there are no stupid questions, right? It's like, look, please ask me something before you spend 2.5 hours or your entire day on
Yeah,
Google trying to find the answer to something. Like I can tell you that in 1 second, and honestly, you're not bothering me. Now, if 6 months from now you are tapping me on the shoulder for every single little question, I'm gonna start to wonder if you're the right person for this organization. But in the first 3 months at least, it's like,
you're good.
hey, like you can ask me anything, at any point during the day. Um, so that's that. I think another thing in terms of like conflict avoidance and or just that sort of like uh, I know what you're saying about like, look, I like to keep things low stakes, meaning like I I, th- I think like let's not make a big if you have to tell somebody something, let's not make a big deal out of it, right? Like I think that if this new guy who started does something incorrectly or does something not to my liking, it's so much easier for me in the moment just to be like, oh, hey, by the way, in the future, like I prefer XYZ, or
Sure.
like, hey, just like going forward, this client hates XYZ, and like, so from now on, we're going to do it this way.
Sure.
Just saying things like in the moment, right, is very disarming and deflating because it's not a big deal, right? Or maybe it is a big deal, but like I don't want this employee to have them feel like it's the end of the world or it's a big deal or they're in trouble or they did something wrong. Um, so that's another thing. Like just keeping feedback, try to keep it low stakes because honestly, it's not like I don't think I need to pull you into a private Zoom room with a
Yeah.
with a representative of the HR team as a witness to tell you something that is just normal in the course of like doing business, and it's going to help you learn. Um, so there's that. And then I would just say, and I think I said this earlier, like FaceTime and regular check-ins with your manager, and they don't need to be formal. It's just so that you are establishing a rapport, and little things don't have to become bigger things. And what I mean by that is like once you have to set a meeting for something, it just becomes a bigger deal, right? It's like, oh,
Right.
hey,
Yeah.
like let's meet for 30 minutes later this afternoon on Slack. I mean, on Zoom, and then that person's sitting there like, oh my god, what's this meeting
What are they gonna
about?
tell
Like,
me? Yeah.
yeah,
Packing my bags.
yeah,
What am I doing?
yeah, right. Um, so yeah, it's a two-way street, right? A lot of the responsibility is actually on the manager, I
Yep.
think.
I agree.
But there is there are things I think the employee can do just to stay in the manager's face.
Yeah, but I think maybe to pull some stuff out of what you're saying is if you're creating a culture of questions and it's okay and it's a safe space and it's not a big deal, that goes two ways, right? Like you're doing it and
Mm-hmm.
you're modeling it, and then when they have
Yeah.
problems or they have questions, they feel comfortable doing it too. So I do think you're right, but I think what you're really doing is creating an environment where it's safe to ask those questions and people are comfortable going like, okay, I'm kind of going towards the north arrow. I'm trying to do the right thing. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not always getting it right, and that's okay.
Yeah, and ultimately, Todd, it's like we've all got the same end game in mind, right? So for
Totally.
me, it's like, man, we want to create the best possible work we possibly can so that our clients are extremely happy with us. And in order to do that, I need you in your position to be doing what you were hired for and be doing it well, and also like not being burnt out and like I don't know, just and also not distracted by like drama.
Yeah.
Right, so
Yeah.
like yeah, like it's like it's important, it's important, it's important to the end goal, like we're all rowing in the same direction. And so like for me to like take 2 minutes out of my day to answer some question is not bothering me, it's not putting me out, because ultimately like you to get up to speed, and so that someday you are that, and it might not be here, but someday you are that senior person that could just be wound up and sent off in the
Send
direction
off.
you're not there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not there
Yeah.
yet, and it's my job to
It's a
help you get
process.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe pivot a little bit. You've talked a little bit about people coming and asking you questions. So maybe talk a little bit about the entrepreneurs organization and basically where people like you can actually go and basically get some help, right? I think we all come to kind of the business table where we basically have a set of skills and we have some strengths, and then we have some areas that are just dark holes that you're like, hey, I just don't do that. Like I don't understand technical pieces of it. And so maybe talk a little bit about the organization, your role, and then basically what the charter
Sure.
really is.
Yeah, sure. So I think the sort of like the starting point for this conversation is that like, look, I don't know how to run a business, right? Like I didn't go to business school. I didn't write a business plan. Um, I know how to design and build websites. I don't know how to like look at a P&L, or like,
Yeah.
how to like I didn't know that I should have a line of credit, Todd, until
Yeah.
like right before COVID, right? Thank God.
Yeah. No
God.
kidding.
But there's just like things you don't know, right? Um, and so I remember like in 2016, I was having dinner with a friend of mine who runs an agency like mine. He's a little more dev focused. And I was just telling him, I'm like, Jeff, like, man, I don't know what to do. Like my my revenue is kind of flat. My profits probably actually going down. My employees are asking for more money. My rent's getting more expensive. I'm like, I don't. I see these at some point. We're gonna hit we're gonna hit an inflection point, and it's not gonna be good, right?
Yeah.
And he introduced me to the Entrepreneurs Organization. So Entrepreneurs Organization, or EO, it's a global organization, but but then there's like regional chapters. So I'm in the New York chapter. I've been in since 2017, and essentially what it is it's a I'd say it's a peer to peer it's a peer to peer like learning and support group. But I think that's the best way to put it. So what that means is it's all of the members. It's a nonprofit. It's run by members. All of the members are business owners who run a business that's it's doing at least $1 million in revenue or more. And then once you've joined, there's a lot of different elements. There's like sort of these like micro support groups inside called forums. It's like there'd be a group of like 5 other business owners that you meet with like once a month for half a day. There's events, like there's really great learning events, and then there's really great social events. And the overarching theme is just that, like, hey, look, we're all running businesses, and if we can all help each other by helping us, like solve problems that we've already solved,
Yeah.
or putting you in touch with some vendor that I've used successfully for years, like, let's do it. And so I just like the what I love about this organization, and this was the very first event I went to. I remember I went to an event. It was a learning day. It was people focused. And I remember two things. One, I sat down in the audience, and I remember the speaker saying, "If given the chance today, would you rehire every single person on your staff?" And I had never had the balls to ask myself that question. I'd
Yeah.
never even asked myself that question, right? And when this person asked that question, it like hit me to the core. I was like, whoa, like there's definitely people I wouldn't rehire. And like,
Yeah.
and I just start kind of looking around, and I'm like, whoa, like all the people in this room are like going through or have gone through like the same things that I've gone through. And I'm like, I can't believe like, so what and then I had lunch and I sat down at lunch with a guy who ran a business cleaning chimneys in New York. And I'm like, I don't know if this group's for me, right? Like I'm a designer and I'm a developer. I run a creative agency, and I'm sitting here talking to this guy who cleans chimneys. Within 10 minutes talking to this guy, I realized like, whoa, okay. It doesn't matter that he cleans chimneys. This guy has employees. He's got payroll. He's got clients. He's got all the issues. I like, in other words,
Liability, all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
running a business, right? At the
Yeah.
end of the
Yeah.
day. And I'm
Sure.
like, wow, I can't believe how much in common I have with this guy. So I think that's really, I think those two examples really speak to what the organization is about, which is that, like, look, running a business is very difficult, and even if you did go to business school, they're not teaching you that sort of like day to day stuff that like that can make you or break you. And so I'm part of this organization that really just gives me access. It gives me a community, and it gives me access to 200 in the New York area other business owners who I can ask a question to. I can be like, hey, can someone introduce me to X bank? I want to inquire about a line of credit. Has anyone had any good story? Has anybody had any? I actually mentioned before about outsourcing, or outsourcing my dev team to Latin America. I got all of those guys through connections in EO. I just asked people on a message board. I'm like, hey, is anybody outsourcing their dev or technical staff to Latin America? And I got like 5 different people to speak to about that. So that's the organization. My role, I'm very active. I'm on the board. So for 2 years, I ran what's called the Accelerator program. That is for smaller businesses between 250K and $1 million in revenue. The idea is to like get them up to the million mark and get them into EO. And I've been a mentor for multiple years to smaller businesses, and this year I'm the communications chair. So just keep maintaining a role on the board and doing like communications, which is kind of like what I do for a day job anyway.
Yeah. So maybe talk to me a little bit about the accelerator and just getting people from 250 to 1 million. So like, what do you think some of the kind of core areas that the program or you've seen just historically are areas? Because I think all of our entrepreneurs, we deal with a lot of high growth ones. And so I think getting to 100,000 or 200,000 and getting those early adopter clients is one thing. But like scaling that to 1 million or to 5 million, like there's just these inflection points that are super hard.
Yep.
And so I'm kind of curious about like, what do you teach? What are some of the fundamentals that you kind of talk through? Because I do think that would be super relevant.
Yeah, sure. So I think the big one, at least for me, was finance, right? So just understanding. I mean, my accountant would come in and show me the P&L at the end of every month, right? And it was actually probably like a month later, right?
Yeah,
By the time you got
it's a lagging indicator for you. Yeah.
And it couldn't be any more of a lagging indicator, right? It's like, oh, this was what we had in the bank a month ago. That means not. I like at the time I didn't know what to do with it anyway. And now today, I at least I know it's not helpful, right? So the financial piece, just basically being able to like understand the engine of your business. Like, okay, how much money should you be spending? If this is the revenue you want to target, what's the profit you should target in order to, and what's healthy profit, right? Versus like break even, versus too much profit. And too much profit is just, I think, an indicator that maybe your team's working too hard and you need to kind of invest in more people or something. But, how do you look at utilization? Like how do you forecast, right? All of these things that like, I think people, especially those smaller businesses on the sub 1 million mark, definitely below 500K, they're looking at their bank balances probably and like that's the measure of financial health. And like there's nothing wrong with that at that level because that's all you know. But the fact is, like, looking at your bank accounts and having a general feeling of like the projects you might win or the checks that might come in, that's not that you do not have a good picture of the financial health and well-being of your company. And so that is a big pillar of EO, is just like learning all of that stuff and not becoming like, you don't have to go to accounting school. You don't have to be able to like manipulate a spreadsheet with all of these macros and functions. You just have to be able to read and understand the numbers that are crucial for your business. So for me, that's revenue, that's profit, and that's utilization, or what we call the labor efficiency ratio. So that's a big one. I think another one is delegation, right? Like a funny thing to see in the accelerator is it's funny because I was there. I mean, like part of the accelerator has 4 full learning days per year. So 1 day per quarter, you have to show up to an in-person event for the entire day. And so you see these people at the beginning of their journey into the program and they're like, what? I have to like be offline or at least like not in front of my computer constantly for like 7.5 hours straight. Like, no, I can't do that. My business will fall apart. And it's like, well, okay, well, that's why you're here, right?
Yeah,
because you should, what? Yeah. Like you should be able to take a day off from your business, have it run, or at least not fall apart, so that you can, invest in improving the business. And so like, let's get you there. Let's get you to the spot where you can show up to these learning days and like not be freaking out. And so the big thing there is delegation, right? It's like you can't do everything in your business. You should only do the things that you are really, really good and gifted at. Think about your hourly rate, right? Like think about what your hourly rate would be. Like let's just say it's $200 an hour, and it may be 100, maybe 300. But like, if your hourly rate is $200 an hour, you shouldn't be doing something like the basic minutia maintenance tasks, like I'm like sending clients invoices. Honestly, like that is not something that I should be doing. It's just not my time is finite, and I should be working on other things. And so
Higher value things.
getting business owners to wrap their heads around that, right? Just to understand that like you have to delegate, or you're never going to scale beyond where you are now. Right,
Yep.
and then I think another big piece. That first event I went to was this full day learning event I'm talking about, and it was People Day, and just understanding like what first of all, like what roles do you need in your company, right? What are your company's values, at least, like even if they're not outwardly expressed, you should have a good idea of like what it takes to like work here, to be a good employee here. um, and so honestly, like understanding the roles you need to hire and how to hire them, and then back to the financial piece, how to budget for them.
Hmm.
This is all stuff that like when you start in your business, you have no clue about this stuff. And so
Yep.
EO really serves, the accelerator specifically really serves to get people from that like I'm tearing my hair out and I'm doing everything myself and I can't take more than 4 hours away from my computer without the world collapsing, to to just having more control over their business and over their day to day.
Yeah. Well, that sounds good. It sounds like an amazing organization that fills a really critical role. I think everything you're talking about, you said it before, doesn't matter if you're a chimney sweep, you're an agency, or high like growth startup, you have all these same problems. So maybe this kind
100%.
of, yeah, maybe this pivots me to a little bit about traction and just execution, right? I think it's one thing to like build a business plan and build up these things and say I'm going to hire these people and we're going to grow and all these things, but without kind of an execution plan, there isn't, and really holding everybody to it. That seems pretty difficult, right? And so before, you and I talked about Gino Wickman, we talked about traction, we talked about EOS, and it sounds like you've gone through kind of that journey a little bit from, and maybe it's partly on your entrepreneurial organization where it's like giving you some ideas of saying you can't do it all, A, and then you have to figure out what you do really well. And then B, how do you
Yep.
surround yourself with people that can help execute and get you to these goals? And so maybe talk to me a little bit about that, because without that kind of fundamental execution, platform, you don't grow, right? You can't get to
Yep.
2 million, $3 million.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Yeah. So we run EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, as written about in the book Traction by Gino Wickman. And so, what is it? It's a system. It's a system of like best practices for running a business. There are a couple of different. They call them operating systems. There's a couple of different systems for running your business. I'm a fan of Traction, or EOS, as it's called EOS. It's in the book Traction. I'm a fan of it, but I just think as long as there's, even Traction says like, just it doesn't have to be our system, but just run a system, right? And run a single system. And so what is it? What do I mean by system? It's like I said before. It's a collection of processes and best practices that are time tested, and they are tested across every single like vertical and industry on the planet. And it's really just it's basics, but it's amazing how just understanding and implementing the basics, like how far that will get you. And so, the system, it's pretty wide ranging, but the things that we got out of it are, meeting structure, and meeting pace and frequency. That's a big thing, right? I think a lot of people waste a lot of time in meetings, simply because there's just no agenda and the meeting ends without like next steps. I mean, that seems so obvious, but like how many meetings have you been on where there's just
Too many.
you're going
Too many.
yeah, you're just going around the room, people are just giving their updates, and then at the end of the meeting it's like, okay, so let's meet next Friday. And then you meet next Friday and it's like nothing
Same
happened
deal.
between this meeting and
Groundhog's
that meeting,
Day.
right? Right. So there's like just the meeting structure, meeting cadence. There's the people piece that EOS is very helpful with. They have something they call the accountability chart, and this goes back to what I was saying before about knowing what roles should be at your company. The accountability chart is, kind of think about it like an org chart, but it's not focused on people, it's focused on roles, which means that, like, look, as a startup, you might have 3 people at the company, but the fact is you probably have 10 roles, right? So like
Yeah.
you've got the CEO, you've got the COO, you've got the finance person, you've got the marketing and advertising person, you've got the HR person. Like Traction EOS does a very good job of saying, okay, let's map all this out. And let's map out, like, even if me as the head of North Street, yes, I'm the head of North Street, but I'm also down here as the head of HR, and I'm also somewhere in the finance department as like one of the people that like is on the finance team. But what this does is it gives you an idea of thinking past the people you have and the size you're at now to understand, okay, someday I'm going to have individual people in all of these roles, right? And then sometimes these little roles are going to actually probably expand into their own little departments. But even though I'm only 4 people today, I need to start thinking like a bigger company. I need to plan on the people I am one day going to need. So the people part's a big piece of it. And then I'd say our biggest takeaway from EOS and Traction, Todd, is really the visionary integrator relationship, which is just one of the core pillars of EOS and Traction. And all of this, what that is saying is that the most well run organizations in business have 2 people at the very top. One is like the creative, visionary, kind of like right-brained person, and the other is the data-driven, results-driven, process-oriented left-brain person. And that person's called the integrator. And the idea is that the visionary is the person, they probably started the business. They are the ones that have the big relationships and the big visions and the big dreams. But it's the integrator's job to make sure that this stuff, at least the good ideas, can get done. It's the integrator's job to do it, right? To actually make it happen. Make sure that you have the people, processes, and profit in place to do the things that the vision to move the company in the direction that the visionary is moving it. And so EOS, just to be clear, EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system, is a totally different animal from EO, which is the entrepreneur's organization. They are very closely related only because the founder of EOS was in EO, and EO
Okay.
uses a lot of EOS tools, but
Yeah.
they are totally different things. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's good. It sounds like it served your organization pretty well as a starting point. I think one of the things that I would say is I've gone through this a couple times with some startups. Vernacular. We all talk the same language. That's huge
Yes.
in this, right? And so it's not a misconstrued, like, what are we talking about? Like, it is concrete. These are the words we use. These are the vocabulary we use. And this is how we talk about it. And when everybody gets on the same page, there is clarity in that. And then I think there's roles and responsibilities, and there's metrics and KPIs, and there's all sorts of things that you can drive from that. And I do think that's a pretty key element of making that work.
Yeah, the KPI piece, thank you for reminding me of that, is big, right? That's a big part of EOS, and it's a big part of any of these systems. And all that, EOS calls it the scorecard. And the best way to think about this, and I said this to someone the other day, and this was something I heard myself at a learning day, but like your scorecard should like imagine you're on a desert island, or you're stranded on an island, and a bottle washes up with a message inside it. You should be able to pull open that little piece of paper and unroll it, and it should have no more than like 5 metrics on it, right? And like those 5 metrics should be able to tell you how well your business is doing this week, like right now, right? And
Not
that's
get off
why
the island. Not get off the island. That'd be way more important.
you might have to, but the idea being, all right, well, let's pretend you're on vacation, you're not stranded. But the idea is what we were saying before about like looking at the P&L that's already a month out of date, or looking at the money in your bank account. That's not an indicator of like how well your business is doing at all, right? And so figuring out what those numbers are is a big part of the EOS traction system.
Yeah, that's good. Well, hey, we're going to wrap it up here. I got one more question for you. So if you had to go back to the Tom of 14 years ago where you started this business, what would be like 3 pieces of advice you'd give that individual that's starting now, right? You're probably doing this a little bit in your entrepreneurial organization, right? You're mentoring people that are coming back up. But I'm kind of curious about like when you look at all of the steps you've done, there's probably some good nuggets here that are good takeaways that you'd love to go back and tell the early Tom and saying, you're going to make some mistakes, but I'm going to help you not stub your toe nearly as much.
Yep. I think the big one is, and we've talked about a lot of this, but the big one is delegation. I would just shake myself and say, Tom, you can't do everything. And like, you literally, like, don't try to like, you shouldn't be the one reconciling the bank accounts and like, right. I mean, man, I was handwriting checks at one point to like give to our landlord, right? Where our office was. It's like, you will go crazy and your business will just never move forward if you are trying to do everything. So figure out what you're really good at, what you like doing, focus on those things and get other people, whether part-time, full-time, or, even automations, like get those things off your plate and get those done elsewhere. That's number one. I think number two is real financial visibility. I mean, Todd, like just knowing, like, I mean, I can open up a spreadsheet right now and I can tell you what our projected like revenue and profit is for this month, which hasn't even closed. It closes today. But I can also tell you what our revenue and profit was for the last 3 months, the last 12 months, the last 6 months, and I can tell you what we're projecting for the rest of the year, right? So just the ability to do that is huge. Yes, it helps you sleep at night as an owner, but it also helps you like, can I hire somebody? Or is it like, would it be crazy to hire somebody? Can I make this investment in this marketing initiative? Or like, no, do I actually need to like batten down the hatches and, weather hard times? You don't know unless you have that financial visibility. And then, lastly, I think I would say again, like look for a support group. It doesn't have to be EO by any means. I mean, I have a weekly call that I do every Thursday with just 2 other agency owners. We're in the same business. We have the same problems. We get on this call, we laugh and we cry together, and it's just like, it's the best part of my week. But like, I can't tell you how much we help each other, like practically, like, oh, like, yeah, I have somebody that can help you with that, or, oh, here's the number to that service that does this. So practical, but also like emotional and like mental well-being. Like, okay, I'm not in this alone. Yeah. So finding support is definitely the third piece of that.
Well, I think that's good. I do think the last one is critical. I think being a business owner is a lonely business, right? If you don't do that. There's all 100%. People bring you problems, right? They don't bring you good news most of the time. They bring you problems, things that they can't solve.
Right.
And so you kind of get pulled in so many different directions, and people expect you to have the answers. And a lot of times you don't, and you got to go figure it out. And so having those networks, having those mentors, are critical to continuing your growth and professional development. So, Tom, this has been good. I appreciate you taking the time. There's just a lot of honesty and transparency in what you're talking about. And so I appreciate that. I think it's humbling to people to kind of talk about, the good and the bad, right? Like, entrepreneurship isn't for everything. It's not always good, but it's a great ride. You do need to be, kind of grounded in reality. You need help. And you need a kind of a growth mentality to really do it successfully. And so I think you've shared a lot of good tips and wisdom, and I appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I really enjoyed meeting you the first time, and this was a great chat. So thank you.
Yeah, well, good. Thanks a lot. If you enjoyed the podcast today, please just take a moment to rate it or comment on it for us. This feedback really helps us, and it helps us get the word out to helping other entrepreneurs and founders. Thank you.